Coming up right around the corner, we have the most anticipated UFC event of the year so far, UFC 314, headlined by Alexander Volkanovski, the great himself, going up against Diego Lopes in a featherweight title bout to claim the vacated featherweight title, which was vacated by Ilia Topuria. Also, we got an amazing co-main event, Michael Chander versus Paddy Pimblett, Yair Rodriguez welcoming Patricio Pitbull to the UFC, Bryce Mitchell taking on Silva, Nikita Krylov and Dominic Reyes, Dan Ige, Sean Woodson, Yaunjan Nan versus Verena Vandijarova. And we got Jim Miller, Chase Hooper on the card, Cedric Dumas, and Michelle Olashechuk. We got some great fights, so we're going to go down and break this card down from the top to bottom. First off, I want to start with my kind of favorite fights to look out for the night. The guys that I want you guys to look out, my prospect of the night. I got Silva as that big guy that you need to watch. He is one of the best prospects inside the UFC. Could be a future UFC featherweight champion. Also, another guy to go out and watch is Chase Hooper fighting Jim Miller on the prelims. Is a minus 800 favorite. And is an incredible grappler, submitted Clay Guida in his last one, and is truly a very, very, very good fighter. Some fights to watch out that are going to be very, very good on this card. First off, I want to talk about someone who I already kind of did, Bryce Mitchell versus Silva. I think that this fight is going to be absolutely electric. I do think that there is going to be a submission on the side of Bryce Mitchell or a finish on the side of Silva. Also, another fight that you got to go watch, the UFC's most entertaining and lowest IQ fighter in the organization, Michael Chandler, going up against the Scoutser, Paddy the Baddy Pimblett in the co-main event. 5 rounds of action, even though I do not believe that it's going to take that long. But let's kind of start recapping this card. First fight, I'm going to kind of do a quick overview of. I'm going to start with Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson, the featured prelim on this card. I think this is going to be a very hard fight for Dan Ige to win. Sean Woodson is a very rangy striker. He is 13-1-1. His last fight was a win. He's 6'2" for the UFC featherweight division and is a very, very, very hard-hitting sniper. He's got a reach of 78 inches. He's got a leg reach of 44 inches. It's just a lot bigger in every single category than Mr. 50K Ige. But Dan Ige is one of the biggest power punchers inside the UFC. He is such a good and big puncher. He had a fight last year with the guy in the main event, Diego Lopes, where he came up short, but he also took that fight on 4 hours notice. He had a very close fight with Lerone Murphy, who is a very good fighter who just beat Josh Emmett this past weekend, and it looks like he could be a future title challenger. I mean, ultimately, this is a very hard fight for Dan Ige, but I am going to go out there and say that Dan Ige is going to win a decision victory. He's a very crafty veteran to where I truly believe he can go out there and go beat Sean Woodson in a couple categories and squeak out a victory. Like I said, very, very hard fight for Dan Ige. He is the underdog in this one. I do think that this would be a decent fight to put on a parlay, but I would not bet on this fight really whatsoever, considering that it's going to be a very hard striking matchup for Dan Ige to go out and get, but I do think he's got the tools to get it done. Jumping to the opener of the main card, we got Mr. Nikita Krylov versus Dominic Reyes. This is a very, very interesting fight. Dominic Reyes is actually the underdog here, and the only reason I say it like that is Nikita Krylov hasn't fought since March of 2023 when he beat Ryan Spann in a main event. I believe it has been a very, very long time off for him. He is 30-9 compared to Dominic Reyes. Reyes is 14-4. Dominic Reyes coming off a 2-fight win streak, beating Dustin Jacoby and Anthony Smith. Nikita Krylov, on the other hand, is on a 3-fight win streak, beating Volkan Oezdemir, Ryan Spann, and I forgot who the last name was, but genuinely, I do think that this is going to be a very, very interesting fight back and forth. My initial pick is going to have Nikita Krylov winning. I do think that he is a possible, top 5 fighter into this light heavyweight division. I do think that Dominic Reyes is on a roll right now, and I could 100% see him putting down Nikita Krylov in that second or third round after he gets a little tired. But I do think Nikita Krylov is going to go out and wrestle. He's going to go out and just show that he is a more experienced fighter than Dominic Reyes, who has beat the likes of Volkan Oezdemir and whatnot, is riding a 3-fight win streak, has had a little bit of time off, which kind of scares me, but I just think he has better skills out there to go out there and beat Mr. Dominic Reyes. I do think this is going to be a close fight. I think it's going to be Nikita Krylov by decision, but I would not rule out Dominic Reyes going out there and getting a KO victory. Going in one of my fights to watch for the night is John Silva versus Bryce Mitchell. We have the Brazilian versus the American. Bryce Mitchell has been in the news lately for saying some very, very, very interesting things, and I think that this is a fight that everyone wants to see Bryce Mitchell getting knocked out in. Mitchell is 17-3. Mr. Jean Lord Silva is 15-2. These guys are both coming off wins in their last fights. Jean Silva, on the other hand, has ripped off 4 in a row in the UFC to start his career, beating Charles Jourdain, Drew Dober, and Melsik Bagdasaryan in his last one at UFC Seattle. Quick turnaround for him, but how do I see this fight going? First off, I have to say, Bryce Mitchell is 100% the better grappler out of the two of these guys. On the other hand, Jean Silva is easily the better striker out of these two guys. And where do I think the mismatch lies more? I think Jean Silva is so much of a better striker compared to Bryce Mitchell being a better grappler that Mitchell has to get this fight to the ground to survive somewhat. I do think that Jean Silva is going to be able to stop the takedowns. I do think he's going to go out there and kind of nullify anything that comes in his direction from Bryce Mitchell and ultimately work a finish out pretty early in this fight. Jean Silva is one of the best prospects I have seen inside the UFC. You know, I've said this kind of about Peyton Talbot. I've said this about other fighters, but Jean Silva, the demeanor he has, the camp he has, the hard work he has, and the killer mentality that he possesses to go out and put fights out early, get back in there, and just genuinely be an amazing UFC fighter is unworldly. I think that this man could possibly be a UFC future champion in the featherweight division. I think he could beat some of the top 5 fighters right now, and I think this is going to be a long night at the office for Bryce Mitchell. Jean Silva is currently a minus 278 favorite as the time of recording this video, and I do think that might be a tiny bit high because I do think that Bryce Mitchell is a good enough grappler to where he could put Jean Silva in some very technically difficult positions, considering that Silva hasn't fought the likes of the best grapplers in the division. He got taken down by Charles Jourdain, who is a primary striker, but obviously when you have a striker taking down opponents and you're just training for a striker, it's a lot harder. You know, it's not as easy to compare that when you're going up a straight grappler. This might not even be Jean Silva's hardest fight in his UFC career, considering that he took a fight against Drew Dober up a weight class on 2 weeks' notice. But genuinely, I'm going to go Jean Silva by second round TKO. I just think he's going to go out there and absolutely flatline Bryce Mitchell, him walking into a shot. I just look at that fight with Josh Emmett, and I see of how Bryce Mitchell got caught in the stand-up, and I just don't see a way that he's going to go out there and really be able to put Jean Silva down. Now, we're going to go to Yair Rodriguez versus Patricio Pitbull. This is an absolute awful fight for Patricio Pitbull to take as his entrance fight into the UFC. Patricio Pitbull's got a record of 36-7, one of the Bellator GOATs, fighting Mr. Yair Rodriguez El Pantera, the former interim lightweight champion or featherweight champion, at 16-5. The biggest difference is the size advantage. 5'11" to 5'6" for Pitbull. Also, the reach, 71 inches for Yair Rodriguez to 65.5 inches to Pitbull. Leg reach, 41.5% for Yair, 38% for Pitbull. This is a very interesting fight between these two because Yair is such a heavy kicker and throws out so many different kicks. They could be question mark kicks, they could be side kicks, they could be leg kicks, they could be body kicks. He throws out so many different techniques that I think that this is going to be an absolute bloodbath of a fight for Yair Rodriguez or Patricio Pitbull to deal with. I do think that Yair Rodriguez is going to get a win just because of the amount of kicks he throws and how his Patricio Pitbull's stature is going to be the way that Patricio Pitbull wins this fight. And as everyone knows this, is he's got to wrestle. Yair's easily his weakest point is his wrestling game. Now he's got good Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu off his back, submitted Josh Emmett with that triangle. But ultimately, if Patricio Pitbull is going to want to win, he's going to want to ground and pound him. He's going to want to go out there and defeat Yair Rodriguez in that department. But I do think that Yair is going to be able to mix it up, throw the leg kicks, throw the body kicks, throw the head kicks, and ultimately get a second round TKO over Patricio Pitbull. Now, in the co-main event, we got Paddy the Baddy Pimblett going up against Michael Chander. First thing I want to say is please don't bet on this fight because on paper, I'm going to tell you Michael Chander should win this fight. on paper, Michael Chander is a better wrestler. He's a better striker. He's more powerful. He might have a better chin. The only way that the only area that Michael Chander is worse than Paddy Pimblett is the submission and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game. Now, I don't think that that's going to be a very big factor unless if Chander lunges himself into Paddy Pimblett's guard. But the biggest thing is Michael Chander has some of the lowest fight IQ I have ever seen inside the UFC. He is more worried about being the most entertaining fighter in the organization rather than getting wins. That has led him to a 2-4 record inside the UFC. He's only fought the cream of the crop, the Dustin Poiriers, Justin Gaethje's, Dan Hooker's, Charles Oliveira's twice. He's only fought those type of guys. And now he's taken a step down in competition to fight someone like Paddy the Baddy Pimblett. But I do think that, like I said, on paper, Michael Chander is going to win this fight. In reality, what is going to happen? I really don't know. Don't bet on this fight. I am not confident with the pick. I'm going to say that Paddy Pimblett is going to go out there and submit Michael Chander. But I do see a world where Michael Chander goes out there, puts together a very good game plan, knocks Paddy Pimblett out of the first round, hits a backflip in the octagon, and is doing his thing. Michael Chander is one of the most entertaining fighters. He's also incredibly entertaining when he's doing this smart. Look at the Dan Hooker fight. Look at the first round of the Charles Oliveira fight. I mean, genuinely, Michael Chander is one of the most baffling UFC fighters because I genuinely think he could go in there and beat the likes of Islam Makhachev if he had any sort of brain cell in there, considering of how good of a striker he is, how elite of a wrestler he is, and genuinely is such a good all-around stocky fighter. And I just don't think that he's going to be able to outmatch Paddy Pimblett because Paddy's very smart, very intelligent, has very good techniques on the feet and on the ground, and I just think Chandler's IQ is too low to really go in there and beat Paddy Pimblett. But like I said, if that Chander who really is smart comes out, I think he beats Paddy Pimblett pretty easy. Official prediction for the fight, like I said, I'm going to go Paddy Pimblett by third-round submission. This is a 5-round fight, just as a reminder, and I do think that Paddy Pimblett is going to catch Michael Chander with something as he's going in, a little bit desperate to get the fight to the ground, and ultimately take it, a little bit off his hands. Pimblett's going to get some sort of submission, very quick, choke it up, and ultimately get the win in Miami. Now, in the main event, we got Alexander Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes. Both of these guys are some of the elite featherweight talents right now. Diego Lopes is on a 5-fight win streak. He came into the UFC against Movsar Evloev on 5 days' notice and took the top 5 or top 7 UFC featherweight to the distance in his hardest fight of his UFC career. Now, Diego Lopes, after that, has ran up 5 wins, with 3 of those being finishes, beating Pat Sabatini, Sadiq Youssef, Dan Ige, Brian Ortega, and all those different type of guys. I think that Diego Lopes is one of the best fighters inside the UFC featherweight division. But as we all know, Alexander Volkanovski has been there and done that. The former UFC featherweight champion, won the belt off Max Holloway, defended against Max Holloway, beat Brian Ortega, the Korean zombie, Max Holloway again, went up to challenge at 155, lost to Islam in a very, very close fight, beat Yair Rodriguez, and is on a 2-fight skid with 2 knockouts in his last one. Now, I do think it's a little bit different because he has taken the proper amount of time off. His last fight was in February of 2024, where he got absolutely slept by Ilia Topuria in that second round in an incredible fight. But what is going to happen now? Because we got the younger generation versus the older generation. Diego Lopes is only 30 years old, and that is 6 years younger than Alexander Volkanovski, who is walking around at 36. And as we all know, there is the curse of every single fighter under welterweight who has had a title shot at the age of 35 and older has not won. It's some unreal record, and I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but let's see if Volkanovski can turn this around, because he might be one of the best fighters under welterweight of all time. And genuinely, do I think he's going to go in there and beat Diego Lopes? And I think the answer is a lot more complicated than saying yes or no. But my official prediction, I am going to say no. I do believe Diego Lopes is going to go in there and crack Volkanovski very early on in this fight in the first round and get him out there very early. Now, I do believe that the longer this fight goes on, I do believe that Alexander Volkanovski will have a better chance to win. Diego Lopes is one of the craziest one-round fighters in UFC history. His knockouts against Gavin Tucker, or his submission against Gavin Tucker, and his knockouts against Sadiq Youssef and Pat Sabatini, I believe were all in the first round. The two knockouts definitely were in the first round. But genuinely, it is going to be an absolute war between these two individuals. And Volkanovski's chin, even after the two knockouts prior to that, was never that good. He just was always such a good mover, and after that Islam and Ilya fight, I do think his chin is going to be better than it was going into that Ilya fight, but Diego hitting so hard and being so precise, especially in that Brian Ortega fight where he knocked him down and knocked him out and woke him up with the other punch, I do think is going to be a it's a very clear indicator to how good of a striker Diego Lopes is. Not to mention that Diego's best area is his Brazilian jiu-jitsu on the ground. Now, Volk's got to switch it up. He's got to strike. He's got to be a counterpuncher. He's got to have good foot movement. And also, I do believe if he gets a couple takedowns in this fight, maybe one or two just to keep Diego Lopes guessing, is going to help him out a lot. Like I said, as the fight keeps going, Volkanovski is going to have the advantage and possibly could beat Diego Lopes going on. But I do think he's going to get clipped early. I do think the reign of Volkanovski is going to be over. I do believe Diego Lopes is going to win the UFC featherweight title via first round KO. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA, and please let me know what you think down below in the comment section about all these different fights that are coming up at UFC 314. I think that this is one of the best fights of the year. We got Alexander the Great Volkanovski versus Diego Lopes, Michael Chandler versus Paddy Pimblett, which is a banger. I'm super interested to see how Patricio Pitbull does inside the UFC, going up against someone who as complicated and tough and just as stylistically tough of a matchup as Yair Rodriguez. Jean Silva given his opportunity on the big stage to fight Bryce Mitchell. Dominic Reyes seeing if he can get himself back into title contention fighting Nikita Krylov. Dan Ige versus Sean Woodson. All these other fights on the card. We love seeing what's going on, and genuinely, the UFC card in Miami, Florida, UFC 314, is one of the best cards so far of the year and is probably going to be one of the best cards of the year in totality. Thank you guys so much for watching this episode of Fight Season MMA. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And while you're down there, please turn on the post notifications just so you guys are always notified as content releases every single day. And with no further ado, I will see you guys very soon with more UFC content and news.